voilà. And one more thing. There we go. Ok. Et ben voilà. Ce soir, alors, j'ai oublié de, en fait, de trouver le... Oups. Voilà. On va parler de la cuisine ce soir et on va commencer avec le passé composé. We're talking about French cooking and French, continuing to talk about French foods this section of the chapter. And we're going to start our first past tense, which many of you may have already seen in prior French courses that you may have had. Passé composé. We're just doing part of passé composé tonight, so you'll have some more passé composé after the test for chapter 5, but we'll just have part of it for this chapter. I don't think there were any other announcements. I'm still catching up on lots of stuff, as you can tell, so just keep an eye on Blaisview, and everything should be up tonight, and I should be all caught up on grading for the most part tomorrow. So you'll have your in-progress grades and a couple of other things. So that's all. Et puis, oh, and the 2 quizzes that you're still waiting for. So, with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dig in. Et on va regarder le vocabulaire de la cuisine. Alors, tonight we're talking more about French food as in when you're cooking it than as in when you're eating it or ordering it in restaurants or whatever. Obviously, all of these things kind of mesh together anyway, but tonight we'll talk about some specific usages that have to do with when you're preparing it as opposed to just eating it or ordering it. Voilà. Alors, il y a pas mal de vocabulaire, comme on a eu, je veux dire, dans les 2 premières parties du chapitre. And some of these actual things here that we've seen already, and now we're seeing them in more of a cooking context. So here, faire la cuisine, to cook, n'est-ce pas? Faire la cuisine. Et puis beaucoup d'ingrédients. You have all kinds of ingredients here. Le citron vert, les tomates, un citron, les poivrons, de l'ail, un oignon, de la mayonnaise, de la moutarde, du vinaigre, de la farine, du sel et du poivre, n'est-ce pas? Et ce sont des ingrédients très 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 communs avec quoi on fait beaucoup de cuisine et en France et ailleurs. Voilà, on continue un tout petit peu. Pensez, pendant qu'on parle du vocabulaire, à ces questions. So think about these questions as we go through this section of the chapter. Faites-vous souvent la cuisine? Quels ingrédients préférez-vous? Planifiez un repas avec votre partenaire et présentez-le à la classe. Oh, j'ai oublié, c'est pas une question. I forgot that one's not a question. This is a good thing to do if you know anyone near you or if you want to get on Skype with somebody and talk about what you might cook together. It's a great way to practice a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing. Pardon. And you have a good example here. Nous préparons une soupe aux légumes, une tarte aux poireaux, du pain et un gâteau au chocolat. C'est quand même costaud comme repas, n'est-ce pas? I don't know how many. Ben, en fait, une tarte aux poireaux, we would think more like quiche for this. Quiche with poireaux in it. Poireaux are leeks. Poireaux are so good. Leeks are really expensive in the States. They're not nearly that expensive in France. I'm not sure why they're so expensive here, but if you've never cooked with leeks, you should try it. They're really, really good. They're related to onions. They look like ginormous green onions. And they have a very subtle oniony flavor. They smell pretty strong when you're cutting them, but when you add them to things, it lends this very subtle oniony flavor to things. It's very, very good. They tend to be full of sand, so cut them up, and my advice to you is cut them up and break up all the little circlets of leek, and then put them in a colander or something, kind of keep rinsing all the sand off of them that way. Or else you're bound to have some sand in your soup, or whatever you're making with the poireaux. Mais c'est très 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 bon, hein, les poireaux. Et puis du pain et un gâteau au chocolat. If they're gonna have a gâteau au chocolat, I think they probably would be having a salad too, just because it's kind of unusual to go to the trouble of having dessert and a meal where you're not even having, excuse me, salad. I'm having my yawning fits again tonight, so voilà. Très bien. Et puis la soupe aux légumes, I'm imagining for this kind of a potage parmentier, potage, je veux dire, un potage, oh, what do you call it? Oh shoot, I just forgot the name of it. Well, a potage. A lot of the time, the soup that you have in the home, that is at the beginning of each meal, especially lunches and dinners, is kind of a blended up soup. It's pureed a lot, and then it'll have little pieces of vegetables or whatever in it, and that's a pretty common soup to have in before the meal each time. It's so yummy having soup at the beginning of the meal. Anyway, on y va. Alors, pour le vocabulaire, on va continuer un tout petit peu avec des exercices. Hein. Alors, regardez bien les ingrédients. On va regarder ça. Et je vais élargir ça. Puis on va réélargir. Et voilà. Alright. My scroll is still messed up, so that's going to be driving me crazy. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de choses ici à souligner, sauf les cuissons pour le steak. This is really good to know if you go to France. Most of the time, Americans in France would order a steak bien cuit. What we would call well done is still not really, is pretty well done for them. So if you order it well done, chances are it's still going to have a little bit of pink in it. So you could order it à point or bien cuit, but most of the time, I waitressed actually in France 2 different summers, and most of the Americans and the English people that came there really wanted their meat cooked a lot more than French people did. So most of the time, à point was not cooked quite well enough for Americans and Brits. But you could try à point just in case. And if you are one of these people that, like me, loves rare steak, or medium rare, these cuissons that they have here, these cooking, I don't even know what we call that in what we call that in the States, the amount of cooking, or the way that you say how much your steak needs to be cooked. Bleu is really, really, really rare, and saignant is much more rare than what we would call medium rare. We would probably call saignant rare. And then if you have à point, that's more like medium rare. So these are all just a little bit less than what it really says here on the list. And chances are you're going to want bien cuit or à point. You can always have it cooked more, but you can't have it cooked less. So if you're not sure, err on the side of caution. And then you can give it to them to go cook it some more if you need to. Alors, vous avez aussi des parfums, ou je sais pas, des arômes, quoi. Various flavors that we talk about when we're cooking things. Aigre, amer. And amer is said the same way, whether you're talking about the masculine or the feminine. Okay? Amer, amer. Épicé, grillé, piquant, salé, sucré, bien sûr. Piquant as in spicy hot, right? Épicé then is spicy as in flavorful. So if something is very savory, has a lot of different spice flavors in it. A good example of this would be like dressing at Thanksgiving, stuffing at Thanksgiving. It has a lot of spices in it, but it's not necessarily spicy, what we would call hot and spicy, right? But that's what they mean by épicé. Something you can taste there are a lot of spices being used, but it's not necessarily hot spicy. Whereas piquant is hot, as in, cayenne pepper or red chili or uh, jalapeno or something like that. So be careful of those two because they're kind of false cognates. Et voilà. Alors, pour parler des quantités pendant que vous faites la cuisine, when you're in the process of making a recipe or making food, you're very often going to be worried about how much of something to put into something, especially if you're following a recipe. So all of these quantity expressions are pretty similar to what we say, and you have very, very distinct equivalents here, right? Une cuillère, une tasse, une boîte, une bouteille, etc. And all of them are going to be with de, d'accord? So we talked a couple weeks ago or last week about, I'm going to show you those reminders about things to review in just a minute. Things that you definitely need to default to de, right? So our default de, right, is with partitives. Oops. Right? Or with quantities, right? So beaucoup de, assez de, etc. Et puis comme on a aujourd'hui 1 kilo de, une cuillerée de, une tasse de, etc., n'est-ce pas? And I actually just said something that you guys don't have in your list. They say une cuillère de. You're going to hear that a lot, but you're also going to hear une cuillerée. Une cuillerée is how we used to say a spoonful of something. So une cuillerée à café, une cuillerée à soupe, etc. And there are soup spoons and teaspoons, that is, tablespoon and teaspoon measures. And so actually let's go ahead and add that. So if you want to talk about une cuillère à soupe, so that's a tablespoon, d'accord? Une cuillère j'arrive pas à faire, voilà. Café is a teaspoon, d'accord? Voilà. Très bien. So just don't forget, you're going to use de with all of these. So note that they have your D apostrophe already done for you here, just in case you need that reminder. And then as we see here in the chapter, ooh, voilà. As they tell you, you're going to use de with all of these. In addition, another yawn, in addition to with your expressions of quantity that you've already used. So assez de, beaucoup de, trop de, etc. D'accord? Encore un truc qui est très très utilisé quand on est en train de faire la cuisine, another thing that you need a lot when you're making food is to talk about what you're in the mood for, or what you may need to add to a recipe to make it taste a little different or a little better, a little more the way you want. Oh, let's add something salty to this, or let's add something sweet, or what are you in the mood for tonight? Oh, I'm really in the mood for something spicy, etc. Alors là, vous allez faire simplement quelque chose de, d'accord? Plus your adjective. So, where we would just say something sweet, quelque chose de sucré. Something salty, quelque chose de salé, etc. So, quelque chose de plus my adjective. D'accord? So let's look at this little essay that they have here at the bottom. And I kind of wanted to make that bigger. Voila. I have a bad habit this semester of not making these activities big enough for you guys to see, so I'm going to try to correct that. Alors ici, vous savez quel est l'équivalent de ces expressions en français. Remember that we're going to say quelque chose plus de plus our adjective for what they're talking about, right? So look up here to something sweet again, quelque chose de sucré, right? Quelque chose de salé. And in your book, you have those, where was that? Oh, that was on the other page. Okay, we're not going to turn back to that. But anyway, you can turn back to that if you need to have it in front of you as we look at this. Pour numéro 1, alors, qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner? D'accord? Vous allez avoir un, alors quelque chose, de, comment vous dites, qu'est-ce que vous dites pour cold? Froid, n'est-ce pas? De quoi avez-vous envie? Oh, j'ai envie de quelque chose de froid ce soir, par exemple. Something hot? Oh. Quelque chose de chaud. And this is hot as in temperature, not spicy, right? Not piquant. Something good. I mean, it's kind of vague, but that's okay. Quelque chose de bon. And note that all of my adjectives are staying in the singular masculine. D'accord? Numéro 4, quelque chose de mauvais, n'est-ce pas? Something interesting. Ah, what's on TV? Ben, il y avait quelque chose de... d'intéressant. D'accord? And again, I'm not making any agreement with these adjectives, right? We're not agreeing with anything. We're just using them as a neutral. So, something cool or fresh. Quelque chose de frais. D'accord? Voilà. Ça vous donne une petite idée, alors, comment dire ça? Et on continue. On va faire exercice A. Et... oh, fallait que je rende ça beaucoup plus large. Hein? Voilà. Alors, je vais chercher mon iPhone pour que je puisse lire. Oh, j'ai très peu de... j'ai très peu de batterie qui reste, mais voilà, c'est pas grave. Ok. Exercice 1 alors. Choisissez l'aliment qui va avec la description que vous entendez. D'accord? So you're going to hear a description and you're going to choose whatever goes best with that description. D'accord? This is based on what we just did. So let's go back and look at those very quickly. Quelque chose de froid, quelque chose de chaud, quelque chose de beau. You're going to be hearing, excuse me, you're going to be hearing descriptions similar to these that you need to then match with one or the other of your choices here. D'accord? Numéro 1 alors. Quelque chose de sucré. Quelque chose de sucré. Alors ça c'est B, n'est-ce pas? Je vais changer ça pour que vous puissiez voir. D'accord? Quelque chose de sucré. Numéro 2. Vous comprenez? Biscuit, don't forget, is a false cognate. Biscuit is not the same as what we would say. Biscuit is what? A cookie, n'est-ce pas? A biscuit is a cookie. Numéro 2. Quelque chose d'aigre. Quelque chose d'aigre. There's a big hint in the word itself. So let me write it for you. You can see quelque chose d'aigre. Alors, le vinaigre, d'accord? And this is a good time for a little digression about this. So now you know where we get the word vinegar. What is vinaigre coming from? So if you look at the first half of the word, d'accord? So basically, bitter wine, right? Wine, just like we would say, du vinaigre, d'accord? We have red wine vinegar, for that matter, don't we? And you can go buy it, but vinegar originally, traditionally, was made from wine. chiefly, and then we know that other things can be made into wine, made into vinegar also, apple cider vinegar, whatever. And those other kinds of vinegar exist in France too, but the first chief kind of vinegar was red wine vinegar, so vinaigre, du vin aigre, vinaigre. Numéro 3 alors, quelque chose de salé, quelque chose de salé. Qu'est-ce que vous allez me donner? Quelque chose de salé? Le sel, n'est-ce pas? Le sel. Numéro 4, quelque chose de piquant. Quelque chose de piquant. Remember what piquant means? Something's hot, something spicy hot. D'accord? Alors, quelque chose de piquant. Quelque chose de piquant. Numéro 5, quelque chose d'amer. Quelque chose d'amer. I should say acidic. Aigre is really something that's like acidic or vinegary. And now we have quelque chose d'amer, which really is bitterness. Alors, quelque chose d'amer. Quelque chose d'amer. Le chocolat noir, n'est-ce pas? Quelque chose d'amer. Numéro 6, quelque chose d'épicé. Quelque chose d'épicé. Le poivre, n'est-ce pas? Quelque chose d'épicé. Quelque chose d'épicé. Le poivre, n'est-ce pas? Très bien. On va continuer un tout petit peu alors. Voilà. Alors, dans cette activité, activité B, étape 1, quel ingrédient n'appartient pas à la recette? So, which thing doesn't go with the rest of them, n'est-ce pas? Alors, pour numéro 1, un gâteau, des œufs, de la farine, de l'ail. I'm looking in my book too. Just sometimes the book doesn't agree with me. So, I want to make sure I'm agreeing with the book as well. Okay. Un gâteau. Alors, pour partir... je comprends maintenant. Pardon, I wasn't paying attention to which things were letters and which things were numbers. We're looking at the recipe for the first thing and what items would be included or wouldn't be included for that recipe. Alors, pour faire un gâteau, vous aurez des œufs, de la farine, and probably not C, probablement pas d'ail, n'est-ce pas? Vous vous rappelez de ce que c'est que l'ail? Garlic, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 2, le steak frites. Alors vous aurez des pommes de terre, du bœuf, et probablement pas B, n'est-ce pas? Le poulet, sans poulet. Numéro 3, un sandwich. So pause the video if you need to before, as you think of the answer before we come up with it, because obviously we're going pretty quickly. Un sandwich. Vous aurez du pain, bien sûr. Du fromage, pourquoi pas. Et des citrons? Probablement pas. N'est-ce pas? Numéro 4. Pour faire une omelette. Alors, vous aurez sûrement B et C, les poivrons, les oignons, et probablement pas de la mayonnaise, n'est-ce pas? Probablement pas de mayonnaise. Numéro 5, de la sauce tomate. Avec quoi est-ce que vous faites la sauce tomate? Avec les tomates, avec de l'ail, mais sans moutarde, n'est-ce pas? Probably not mustard. Numéro 6, la vinaigrette. So again, be sure and pause the video. Pour faire la vinaigrette, vous savez ce que c'est que la vinaigrette? Vinaigrette salad dressing, n'est-ce pas? Alors, pour faire la vinaigrette, vous aurez pas de farine, vous aurez d'huile et vous aurez du vinaigre, n'est-ce pas? Très bien. Alors, actually, we'll do that afterwards. I'll give you my foolproof vinaigrette recipe. It's actually a pretty standard recipe for vinaigrette. But it's easy to remember. Numéro 7, alors pour faire les pâtes, Qu'est-ce que c'est que les pâtes? There was something I told you last week that has to do with the circumflex that makes it easy to remember what pâtes are. So circumflex, every time you see a circumflex, it is when you have an S, usually, in the English word, or in the old French word. And so often that'll be a clue as to what the word is. So pâte, ça fait pasta, n'est-ce pas? Vous aurez probablement du fromage, probablement ou peut-être de la crème, mais pas de confiture, n'est-ce pas? Pas de confiture. Now here they don't necessarily mean cream like you would put in coffee. It could be that. It could be like half and half, but it's more or less, it's more often going to be crème fraîche. Crème fraîche is kind of a thicker cream that we cook with in France a lot. It's kind of halfway between half and half and sour cream. It sounds really rich. It is really rich. They put it in just about anything that you want to make some kind of a creamy sauce for, or thicken up to a little bit. Le coq au vin. De quoi avez-vous besoin pour faire du coq au vin? Coq au vin. Alors, sûrement B, du poulet. Sûrement du vin. Probablement pas de mayonnaise. C'est pas probablement pas. Alors, très bien. Regardez alors, étape 2. Vous allez entendre le nom d'un ingrédient et une quantité. Et ce que vous allez faire, c'est d'associer la quantité avec une de ces deux choses qui vous ont donné. D'accord? So, it would be like me saying a third of a cup of ketchup. And then one choice is meatloaf, and the other choice is an order of French fries. So when would you need a third of a cup of ketchup? Probably in order to make a meatloaf. Not necessarily would you need that much ketchup for your order of French fries, right? So it's a little more specific. You're probably going to need this thing with both of these items, but pay close attention to the quantity in order to choose which thing we're referring to. And again, pause the video if you need to. Numéro 9, alors, il y a la petite Betsy qui va sortir. Alors, vas-y. Voilà. Alors, numéro 9, une tasse de mayonnaise. Une tasse de mayonnaise. And pause the video if you need to. Alors, vous aurez besoin d'une tasse de mayonnaise, probablement pour faire une salade d'œufs, une salade aux œufs, et non pas pour un hamburger, n'est-ce pas? Alors, pour un hamburger, peut-être que vous aurez besoin de la mayonnaise, mais pas autant de mayonnaise que pour la salade, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 10, alors, une tasse de fromage. Une tasse de fromage. Alors, vous allez peut-être mettre du fromage sur un sandwich. Pourquoi pas? Mais probablement pas toute une tasse, n'est-ce pas? Alors, pour utiliser toute une tasse de fromage, vous allez probablement faire des macaronis au fromage, so macaroni and cheese, n'est-ce pas? So again, we're talking about a lot bigger quantity of cheese than you would need for a sandwich. Numéro 11, une cuillère de sucre. Une cuillère de sucre. Pour un gâteau ou pour une tasse de café? Une cuillère de sucre, pardon. Pour une tasse de café, n'est-ce pas? Très bien. Ce serait assez peu de sucre pour mettre dans un gâteau. Numéro 12, alors, une bouteille de vin. Une bouteille de vin. Alors, vous aurez besoin d'une telle quantité de vin pour la sangria, sûrement, mais probablement pas pour la fondue, n'est-ce pas? So we do put red wine in fondue, cheese fondue. Has a fair amount of red wine mixed in with the cheese, but probably not a whole bottle. Unless you're making it for a huge amount of people. Mais pour une sangria, vous allez très probablement avoir une bouteille de vin, peut-être beaucoup plus, n'est-ce pas? Très bien. Alors, Il y avait... Je pensais qu'il y avait une autre étape. Oh, I see. I keep forgetting that the online book has sometimes a different number of things in it than in an activity than the hard copy book. So we'll go on just in case you don't have the hard copy book. There is another section of this activity that you could go ahead and do on your own if you like. Alors, activité D, on va sauter à activité D parce que je veux que vous ayez encore de... c'est la bonne activité, non? Oui, très bien. No, maybe not. Wait a minute. Oh, j'ai sauté. C'est pour ça. Oh, they took that one out. Well, that's very upsetting. I really wanted to do that one. I should have typed up the answers for you. That's okay. Très bien. On va continuer, alors on va faire un peu de grammaire quand même. So continue working on the vocab on your own. I do want to go ahead and do passé composé now. That's what I get. Sometimes I remember to just do the whole lesson plan with the online workbook, and then other times I pull out the hard copy workbook and I start digging through and getting my lesson plan ready, and then I forget that it's not the same activities all the time. So, je m'excuse. Alors voilà. On va parler un peu du passé. Il y avait d'autres choses que j'allais vous souligner. Surtout ici. So every time we try to talk about things that we need to review for what we're doing this chapter, right? So the things that you should review this chapter for passé composé are your forms of avoir in present tense. So go back and look for avoir. I didn't dig up the page numbers for you this time. And you should go review your subject pronouns if you're still not clear on them especially, or just to remind yourselves. Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle, pluriel, n'est-ce pas? But especially avoir. You're going to be using avoir a lot with passé composé, and you don't want to have to stop and think about how to conjugate avoir every time you need to use it. You're going to want to be able to just plug it in as soon as you remember that you need it, or as soon as you realize that you need it. You're not going to want to have to stop and think, oh, what form do I need for je? Oh, what form do I need for nous, etc. So do yourselves a favor and mark down that page number and go back and review those before you jump in on iLearn, especially. And if possible, go stop the video and review them now a little bit before we go on. Because you will need to have avoir pretty clear in your mind before jumping in on what we're doing this part of chapter 5. D'accord? Alors, pour parler du passé, on a le passé composé is one of the ways that we speak about the past in French. Now, a couple of weeks ago, where's that little thing I wrote? I guess I didn't put it on a post-it that time. Last week, I think, or maybe the week before, we talked about what present tense means in French, and that it can mean any of 3 different versions in English. So if I say something like tu manges, right, it means you eat, you do eat, or you are eating. And it depends on context as to which one it means in which case. It's not something that we stop and think about too much as we're speaking in English, because we know that certain of these mean different things. You eat is very general, right? What kinds of things do you eat? Or, I can't think of an example using just you eat, because I just used the perfect again there. You do eat. Anyway, normally if we're talking about you do eat, he does eat. Usually we're emphasizing something. Not always, but quite often. And normally if we're using the ing, it's because we're stressing the fact that it's an ongoing action that's happening right now. Okay? Not always, but those are just some examples as to how we kind of subconsciously make these choices in English. In French, all I need is the one, and it's flexible enough in French to mean all three or any one of these things, depending on the context. Okay? Now, the past tense does the same thing. So go ahead and show you what past tense for this would be. Tu, and then if you know your avoir, what's avoir for tu? Tu as. And then I'll go ahead and show you the past participle for this, which is basically what we would say for an ed form. Manger. D'accord? We'll look at those in a minute. So past tense, or passé composé for manger, means you ate, or you did eat, or you have eaten. Oops. D'accord? And I don't want you to fixate too much on these. I don't want you to be walking around translating these as you speak. But it is something to think about, especially when you're writing sentences or when you're writing composition, to remember that tu as mangé already includes all of these various ways of saying the past tense of eating. Okay? So you don't need to add anything extra if you want to say you did eat. You don't have to add anything extra for you have eaten. You don't take anything out for you ate. You're going to still use the same whole form, tu as mangé, for all three of these ideas. And again, context is what tells your listener which one you mean. Okay? So based on the adverbs, based on everything else that you've said or that the people in the conversation have said, it makes it clear as to which nuance you're pointing to with your passé composé. D'accord? Oh, another yawn. So I just wanted to underline that before we go on and look at passé composé a little more closely. So indicate an action or an event that's been completed in the past. Use passé composé. Most of the time you're going to use avoir plus a past participle. So avoir is an auxiliary verb or helper verb, just like we've got lots of helping verbs and auxiliary verbs in English. So do is a helper, an auxiliary, are is a helper, an auxiliary, did, have, etc. So with passé composé, though, I always am going to have two pieces. And it's one reason that we call it passé composé is that it's a composed tense. There will be a couple of other things that we call composed tenses. But whenever you see that, you know there's going to be more than one part to the verb. Tu as mangé, it's a composed past, so it's made up of two pieces. And then a past participle. And past participle is just like when we say an ed. Okay, we have some irregular past participles in English, and there are a lot of irregular past participles in French. Some verbs use a different verb instead of avoir. Some verbs use être. Don't worry about those until chapter 6. But if you're in doubt, go ahead and use avoir, because most verbs use avoir. And if you're speaking in French to someone, you're asking someone a question or something in Paris, and use avoir instead of être with your passé composé, your idea will still come across. Okay, so your communication will still be successful. We're going to try to use it correctly. So eventually you can't use avoir with every single verb. But if you're in doubt, especially if you're in a conversation with a French person or something, go ahead and use avoir, because your meaning will come through. But in the interest of trying to be learning correct French, we are going to pay close attention to which verbs need avoir and which verbs need être. But we won't have to worry about it till chapter 6, as I said. Alors, un exemple, passé composé du verbe manger. So here we can see what's going on with manger for passé composé. This is the reason I wanted to go back and review avoir. I have a different form of avoir with each of my subjects, just the way I do if I'm only conjugating avoir, right? You're just talking about j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, ta. I'm going to use my same form of avoir that I'm supposed to use for each of these people, right? But then I'm going to add this past participle. And for the ER verbs, your past participle is simply accent aigu. D'accord? Accent aigu, accent aigu. So it's kind of like your ED. D'accord? And we're going to see more of those in a few minutes. Qu'est-ce que... Voilà. Voilà. So, for ERs, I should do this, right? We have accent aigu, and in a moment we're going to see IRs. The vast majority of IRs, oh pardon, are just I, d'accord? And even though we technically haven't had, oops, any REs, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that REs, if you run across an RE, even though technically we haven't looked at them yet in this book, change to U most of the time. Now they're always also going to show us some irregulars that we've had already, and one of those is prendre. We talked about prendre. So prendre is what we call an irregular RE. You guys learned it with a bunch of other verbs that look just like it, right? So prendre actually has an irregular past participle, pris. Okay? So where I would normally say j'ai mangé, instead with prendre I'm going to say j'ai pris. D'accord? Etc. So we'll see some more examples of that in a few minutes. Encore une fois, j'ai mangé, tu as mangé, il a mangé, nous avons mangé, vous avez mangé, ils ont mangé. D'accord? Nothing changes pronunciation-wise, nothing else changes as to which form you need with what. You're going to use the same form that you always use with each of these people, and you're just using your past participle form of manger. So, as I said before, passé composé can express three different things in English for past tense. I ate, I have eaten, or I did eat. Past participle of ER verbs is formed by dropping the ER and replacing it with accent aigu. Excuse me. Here's some more examples. J'ai acheté des fraises hier. So if you stop and really imagine what acheter looks like in the infinitive form, right? Acheter, ER, changes to acheter, accent aigu. Nous avons mangé un gâteau au chocolat. Manger, comme on vient de voir. We just looked at manger, so that one's pretty basic. Il a cuisiné un poulet hier soir. Il a cuisiné. Cuisiner is a standard ER. So, standard ER ending for passé composé, accent aigu. Vous avez parlé avec le cuisinier? Parler, standard ER, changing it to accent aigu. And look at what's happening with avoir. I'm picking the avoir that goes with my person. Vous avez, il a, nous avons, j'ai. D'accord? So be sure and go review avoir if you need to. For past participle of IRs, you end in I. Now what I don't like about their description is that, let's look at mine again. There it is. If you just think drop the R, then I think you're going to be confused when you go to look at the ERs. So I think you should be consistent all the way through. Either tell yourself that you're dropping the R and adding an accent with the ERs, dropping the R period with the I's, with the IRs, etc. Or tell yourself, oh, I'm taking off the ER, adding accent aigu. I'm taking off the IR, adding an I. Or changing the IR to I, changing the ER to accent aigu, changing the RE to U, etc. And again, the RE ones, I'm going to put that in parentheses because we don't need those quite yet. We haven't had the regular REs yet. D'accord? J'ai fini mes devoirs la semaine dernière. Il a choisi une pomme verte. Nous avons obéi à la loi. Another yawning fit. Tu as réussi à faire une omelette. So again, we're ending in I, right, for the IRs. And I'm still choosing avoir based on my subject. So nothing changes about that. And then we had prendre and all of its friends a couple weeks ago. Prendre changes to pris, apprendre, appris, comprendre, compris. And down the road, you'll have other words that are based on this same structure. And anytime you see prendre as part of your verb, then your past participle is going to end in PRIS, regardless of what the prefix might be. So comprendre, compris, apprendre, appris, etc. Vous avez pris des légumes hier? J'ai appris le français l'année dernière. D'accord? The following verbs have irregular past participles. These will just be a case of memorization. The cool thing is you're still going to use avoir with each of these, and there's nothing to worry about with your use of avoir. Just use avoir the way you always would have. So when we looked at this, for example, they're taking avoir for vous, vous avez. They're choosing the form of avoir for je, j'ai, etc. So the same thing's going to happen with these, regardless of how wacky the past participle might look. So here's a bunch. Avoir itself changes to eu. D'accord? So just because we're using avoir for our past passé composé doesn't mean I can't use avoir in the passé composé, right? So the same formula comes into play. I'm grabbing my form of avoir that I need in present tense, and then I'm looking at my verb and I'm grabbing the past participle for it. Okay, so let's look at another example for that, because people sometimes think that's confusing. So we said, for example, je mange, right? And that changes to j'ai mangé, right? If we use one of these irregulars that they have, let's go ahead and use être. So, il est, right? Then I use il. I grab my avoir for il, which is a, and I'm going to grab my irregular past participle, right? If avoir happens to be my verb, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab nous. What's my form of avoir for nous? It happens to be the same thing. And then my past participle for avoir is you. D'accord? So the same thing is happening. It just seems weird because now we have avoir being used twice, right? But don't let that throw you. We're still following the same formula that we've been using with the others. Regardez les autres alors. Dire, dit. Boire, bu. Écrire, écrit. Faire, fait. Lire, lu. D'accord? So what I don't like about this little chart is that it doesn't help you put any of these together, right? To me, it makes sense to put the ones together that are kind of resemble each other in the past participle. So if I were you, I'd put lire over here with these three to remember those a little better. I would keep dire and écrire together, right? And then être and faire, and in fact you could put être and avoir and faire together, because that's another good grouping of those, because you have the three that are kind of wacky on their own. Group these however it's going to be the least confusing to you, but usually it's going to help you if you have the things that are similar grouped together. So être is always going to be out on its own. Faire is kind of out on its own, right? Then I have my examples. J'ai eu des cours difficiles. Ils ont bu du thé vert. D'accord? Qu'est-ce que vous avez dit? Another irregular. Dire, n'est-ce pas? Nous avons été malades. Another irregular. Être. Vous avez fait cette tente? Fait, de faire, n'est-ce pas? Tu as lu la recette? Tu as lu la recette? Lire, n'est-ce pas? Voilà. In negative sentences, your ne pas or whatever go around the auxiliary verb. This is no different than when you learned how to do negation way, way, way back when. We, at some point, told you, fallait que je fasse un nouveau, là. So, negation in French almost always goes, whoop, right? Same thing is going to happen in passé composé. So in present, I have je ne mange pas. Ouais. Il n'étudie pas. n'est-ce pas? Et puis, au passé composé, même chose. My conjugated verb is not the main verb anymore. Now my conjugated verb is the active verb. It's the auxiliary verb. So if I say, par exemple, tu n'as pas lu, because this is active. Oh, I didn't want to highlight the whole thing. There we go. Right? And same thing if I say, par exemple, d'accord? And non pas regarder, because this is my conjugated verb now, not this one. This verb is the most important verb translation-wise, meaning-wise, but this is the active verb or the conjugated verb, and that's the verb that we're always, almost always, virtually always, going to attack with our negation. D'accord? So some more examples. Je n'ai pas bu de café hier matin. So it's not going around my active, it's not going around my meaning verb, it's going around the conjugated verb. Okay, and you can think auxiliary verb if you want to, but if you think active verb, then it's no change from what you did before. Hopefully whenever you first learned negation, people told you, put it around the active verb. And now we're still doing that. Même chose alors, nous n'avons jamais pris de vin. It's going around avoir because avoir is my active or conjugated verb. In questions with inversion, subject pronoun and conjugated verb of form of avoir are inverted. This is exactly the same as what we just did with negation. C'est là la négation. So we're going to do another new one. Okay. When you learned inversion way back when, and I said something like, je sais pas, tu aimes l'opéra, right? I can also say, if I want to do it with inversion, I'm gonna invert my conjugated verb and my subject, right? Oui. Same thing in passé composé. I'm simply inverting my subject and conjugated verb. Okay, so alors, tu aimes l'opéra, aimes-tu l'opéra, or par exemple, nous avons, oh pardon, ce resto, d'accord? D'accord? So another example. Now the only other wacky thing that happened way back when with inversion, and is going to happen now also, is, and I'm going to make this bigger instead, is you may or may not remember that you had a little T thing coming into play with inversion at some points, right? So with inversion, that involves ERs, there was a quick way to tell people this, now I'm drawing blank. Oh, I had it in my notes too. I can't find it in my notes. Anyway, if inversion is involving il, elle, or on, plus an ER, or aller or avoir, then need to add. D'accord? So, for example, oh, pardon. Right? Va-t-il à Val d'Asta? I can't put va-il because I have to have something in here to pronounce it right with, right? And we said the same thing with ER verbs, for example. Oh, right? Same thing's going to happen then with inversion with passé composé, because inversion with passé composé always has to do with avoir. So, these examples I didn't need to do anything because I have something to pronounce. Aimes-tu? Avez-vous? But basically when this T comes into play is when I have two vowels next to each other. So again, your antenna for two vowels being next to each other should be getting super, super, super fine-tuned because we're always talking about it. Virtually always, if you have two vowels next to each other, you have to do something special, right? So same thing goes here. If I'm putting some of these into passé composés into inversion, for example, oh pardon, a-t-elle fini ses devoirs? D'accord? Ou bien, pardon, oh pardon, ah, voilà. D'accord? A-t-il préparé le dîner? Now I don't have to do those with the other versions. I keep forgetting that my scroll is not working right. Because I have something to pronounce with those. So if I say, par exemple, oh wait, I can't think of, okay, I have to do a different one. Avez-vous lu ce livre? I don't need anything because they don't have vowels next to each other, right? Or, par exemple, d'accord? Ont-ils parlé à Pierre? Same thing. I don't need to use anything here. Okay? But when I have this extra thing happening, ils, elles, ont, plus avoir, I need my T. Okay? And it's basically just another d'accord? Voilà. Je vais pousser ça un tout petit peu pour que vous puissiez voir. In case you want to come back to this part of the video and make some notes later. Alors, avez-vous fini vos devoirs? I don't need anything. Luc a-t-il travaillé hier? I do need something here because of my two vowels next to each other, right? Les filles ont-elles dansé hier soir? Ont-elles? I don't need anything here. Okay, so another thing that you might want to go back and look at, we had our stuff I should review, right? D'accord, inversion. And we might as well add negation. Right? So there's a few more things that you should review. Short adverbs are placed between avoir and the past participle. Basically, the rule for this is always, and we talked about this when we did short adverbs before, is that they would be placed after the conjugated verb. So the same thing goes here. So I'm going to add that to your stuff that you should review. If you think about the placement of short adverbs as having always been after the conjugated verb, You don't have to change anything with this. You're just going to put it after the conjugated verb again. And the conjugated verb in this case is avoir. Okay? So we'll see an example. So, for example, on avait dit avant, par exemple, vous mangez vite le matin. Let's add something else just so that you can see that vite is going right after my conjugated verb. D'accord? Now, if I'm talking this in passé composé, the same thing is gonna happen. Vous avez vite mangé. Same thing is happening. I'm putting it after the conjugated verb, just like I put it after the conjugated verb in present tense. Okay? And if you think about it always going after the conjugated verb, you don't have to think about between. It's just the same format that you've always used. It's the same formation, same order, however you want to put that you've always used. And that's the best way to simplify this stuff, is just to latch it on to things that you've already learned. So instead of thinking about between avoir and the past participle, think directly after the conjugated verb, directly after avoir in this case. This is partially why we have negation going where it is because negation is really an adverb form. Okay, so when you put pas right after the conjugated verb, that's because it's an adverbial form and it's going right after there, just like the other short adverbs do. On va voir des exemples. Il a bien fait ses devoirs. N'est-ce pas? These expressions are often used with the passé composé. So this is going to give us little time expressions or sequencing expressions that are often used to show order or are used to be kind of like markers for past tense. Okay, and later when we talk about some other past tenses, you'll see that certain ones point more to passé composé than some of the other ones. This is another good reason to learn these pretty well, so that later your head will be lumping them together with passé composé whenever you see them. So here's some examples. Avant-hier, hier, hier soir, l'année dernière ou l'année passée, le mois dernier ou le mois passé, la semaine dernière ou la semaine passée. D'accord? You still do hear people use passé for these three expressions on the right. In France, at least, you use dernier and dernière more often with all three of these than you hear the other, but you will hear it on occasion. So a lot of these can be used with a couple of other past tenses, but for now, just think of them as cues for you to have passé composé. D'accord? Alors, par exemple, hier, qu'est-ce que vous avez mangé hier? So think about what you ate yesterday. If you need to look up some vocab, you can. Pause the video if you need to. Alors pour moi, par exemple, hier, qu'est-ce que j'ai mangé hier? Je me souviens pas. J'étais malade en fait, la plupart d'hier, et j'ai pas beaucoup mangé. Je pense que j'ai mangé des pâtes. Oui, j'ai mangé des pâtes. J'ai mangé du pain grillé. J'ai peut-être mangé un œuf, je pense, peut-être. Et je pense que j'ai mangé de la compote de pommes, peut-être. Voilà. D'accord? Et vous pourriez comparer avec quelqu'un. Et voilà. So I do want to go ahead and practice a bit of this before I need to make sure that our classroom is still open, even though I told it to close later. Closed by now. I think it's supposed to close at 8:30. Oh, we've already done over an hour. What I'm going to do is the activities that we were going to practice with, I'm going to go ahead and start in on a couple of them. But if we get cut off, because I haven't set up Blackboard Collaborate in a long time, where we would be finishing before where the classroom finishes before we do. I don't think anything happens. I think it just lets us keep recording, but I can't remember for sure. But if we do get cut off, then I'll have these other activities linked on the module for you to go practice if you need to or if you would like to. So let's go ahead and jump in on one at least to kind of see, and I'm going to remind myself which one I wanted to use. So this is another activity on text. And as I've said before, they are going to have vocab that we haven't used before. Don't let that throw you. This one doesn't have too much that we haven't learned, so we're just going to skip a couple of them. And that's what I suggest you do if you get in on an activity online from somewhere else, not iLearn, that is having you conjugate verbs that you haven't seen before, or vocab that you haven't, looking at vocab that you haven't seen before. Just skip it if you need to, and you'll be fine. I just do want to go ahead and do a little bit of this one because it's a little bit quicker than the ones in the book. Actually, having said that, oh, I forgot I can't make it smaller that way. Let's go ahead and look at this activity. Actually, there were a couple in here that I did want us to do. However, I thought it might be quicker just to go ahead and go on text. Most of their activities, I remember now, most of the activities they have here, they're having you distinguish between past tense or present tense. And those are really good. But they didn't have too many for us to actually practice forming the past tense, so that's why we're going to go ahead and go to text. I was just refreshing my memory. So, pour numéro 1, en fait, si there was, oh, le voilà, this is where I really wanted to be. Okay, good. This is on the Allons-y website again, and most of these are very standard verbs that we've already had, so we're not going to worry too much about them. A couple of them use a different tense that we haven't used yet. We're going to skip those, okay, so don't let that throw you. Alors, pour numéro 1, Liane téléphone à sa mère. Alors, le week-end a passé, elle, so think about what, go in stages if you need to. What is avoir for Liane? A. And then I'm going to use my past participle for standard ER. Téléphoner à sa mère. D'accord? Numéro 2. Nous étudions aujourd'hui. Hier soir aussi. Nous avoir. Avant. Past participle for standard ER. Nous avons étudié aussi. D'accord? In each case, if you go through this on your own and you need to see a hint, this is one of the ones we're going to skip, number 3, because we haven't had that kind yet. But let's go ahead and see what it does if we want to know what the hint is. They're actually showing us, I thought it would just give us a hint, but it actually gives us the answer, but that's okay. Le semestre dernier, j'ai eu beaucoup de problèmes. So avoir is our main verb. We're using avoir as our auxiliary, and then our main verb, past participle, is eu. D'accord? Oscar prend un Coca-Cola aujourd'hui. Hier aussi, il a pris. And pause these if you need to give yourself a chance to think of the answers before we do it. Il a pris un Coca. Nous allons faire un voyage cet été. L'été dernier aussi, nous. So faire is my principal verb. Just focus on what they're bolding. Do you remember what this structure is? Aller plus the infinitive. So faire is still my key verb, but aller puts it into kind of a future tense, right? So now we're still using faire as our main verb. What am I going to use for avoir? Nous avons, past participle for faire, fait un voyage. We're going to skip number 7 because that's the same as what we were saying before. We'll play with those later. Those use different verb. Les étudiants travaillent. I'm not going to link this one on Blazeview for you because it's be too confusing for some of you. Les étudiants travaillent beaucoup cette année. L'année dernière aussi, ils ont travaillé dur. D'accord? And we're going to skip again to number 10. Aujourd'hui, vous ne faites pas de football, mais hier, vous avez fait du football. D'accord? Et It's almost the last one we can do. We can do 13 and 14. I didn't realize they had so many of the être ones here, so I hope this isn't confusing people. But for number 13, we can do it as well. Georges n'est pas malade aujourd'hui, mais la semaine dernière, il a été malade. N'est-ce pas? Et we've done faire ones a bunch already. Plus there's a typo. Very bad. At any rate, that gives us a little tiny bit of a practice. I'm not going to link that one on the module after all, just because I don't want to confuse people even worse. In fact, I had a hard time finding activities that just had avoir, passé composé, but I'll try to find a few more to link on the module for you. Et voilà, en ce qui concerne les autres activités dans le bouquin, some of these then, you're thinking about whether it happened today or yesterday, d'accord? Aujourd'hui ou hier. Écoutez les activités des étudiants, indiquez s'ils font les activités aujourd'hui ou s'ils les ont faites hier, d'accord? So just think about hier ou aujourd'hui, depending on what you hear. Basically, you're going to listen for avoir and your past participle, right? So here we go. I'll read these. Hopefully my phone will not run out of juice before we get done. So, numéro 1. Nous regardons la télévision. Nous regardons la télévision. So pause or replay as you like. Aujourd'hui ou hier, nous regardons la télévision. Aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 2. Nous avons mangé au café. Nous avons mangé au café. Hier, n'est-ce pas? Again, pause if you need to. I will try to pause just a little before I say the answer. Numéro 3. Nous mangeons chez Pierre. Nous mangeons chez Pierre. Aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 4. Nous avons choisi un bon film. Nous avons choisi un bon film. Hier, n'est-ce pas? Did I say aujourd'hui for number 3? All of a sudden it feels like I said hier. Numéro 3, c'était aujourd'hui, hein? All of a sudden I thought I had said hier. I don't know why. Numéro 4, c'est hier, d'accord? Numéro 5, nous finissons le livre. Nous finissons le livre. Aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 6, nous étudions à la bibliothèque. Nous étudions à la bibliothèque. Aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 7, nous avons été au cinéma. Nous avons été au cinéma. Hier. D'accord? Numéro 8, nous avons pris le dîner. Nous avons pris le dîner. Hier. Numéro 9, nous avons eu soif. Nous avons eu soif. Hier. D'accord? Numéro 10, nous buvons du vin. Nous buvons du vin. Aujourd'hui. N'est-ce pas? C'est très bien. So, exercise J should be much easier than that. It's almost the same exact thing, except that you've got the verb in front of you to look at and figure out whether it's present tense or past tense, right? So you should be able to do that one pretty much on your own. And then I was seeing if there was one. Yeah, they don't really have one for us to just form it here. They're pretty much all going to ask you to distinguish between past and present. So on iLearn, though, you will have some that are asking you to actually form it into passé composé from the present tense so that you can get some extra practice with that. And we will stop here. So keep an eye on Blaze View for all the other stuff that I will catch up on tonight. And posez-moi des questions quelconques si vous en avez, par mail ou quoi que ce soit. Voilà, je pense que c'est tout pour ce soir. Bonne continuation et à la prochaine. Salut!